move to our main program. We always look forward to our presenters, and I was telling Ed that one of my favorite exhibits years ago that I still remember, and then going through his PowerPoint, I realized I thought it might be him, and it was him, and you'll see some parts of it. But a really great exhibit. I'm so glad he's with us tonight, talking about some very interesting materials on exhibiting. As I said to him, if exhibits were like this years ago, a lot more interesting stuff, to back up the stamps and the covers. I think there'd be more exhibitors today. But Dr. Edwin Andrews is a lifelong collector and accomplished philatelic editor and author. Since 1972, he exhibited 102 times using 27 different exhibits covering myriad of treatments, including traditional, display, thematic, topical, postal history, military postal history, revenue, fiscal revenue, Cinderella, one frame class, picture postcards, and aerophilately. His exhibits have garnered 62 large gold medals, 8 grand and 7 reserve grand awards, and a host of special awards from various societies. He's an active member of numerous philatelic societies, being a life member. Check your mutes. Okay. He's an active member of numerous philatelic societies, being a life member and former member of the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, also a life member and immediate past president of the Polish Society. His other active societies are the American Philatelic Society, American Topical Association, American Revenue Association, Germany Philatelic Society, and the Ukrainian Philatelic and Numismatic Society. It is an accredited APS chief philatelic judge and was the general editor of the most recent, the 7th edition of the APS Manual on Philatelic Judging and Exhibiting. He served on the APS Committee on Accreditation of National Exhibitions and Judges. And from 2013 to 2019, he chaired its educational subcommittee. He's presented numerous seminars on exhibiting and mounting techniques, and is a prolific author in philatelic subjects and research. His most recent book is award-winning Philatelic Treatment and Presentation, a guide to display, thematic, and topical exhibits for exhibitors, collectors, and judges. This book's available on Amazon, has received a favorable review from major philatelic publications, and was awarded a large gold at Chicago PEX in 2021 in their literature exhibition. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Edwin Andrews to our meeting tonight to present with us. And you can start, Ed, by sharing your screen. And Ed, would you want questions during or after, or doesn't matter?
Really doesn't matter, but usually it's better when everybody stores up their questions for after. I keep getting a message across my screen that my internet connection is unstable. So do you have my phone number in case you need to call me?
Why don't you give it to me? You want to give or message?
919-932-0942.
0942. Do you want me to put up your PowerPoint, or do you want to do that?
No, I'll do it, and hopefully it'll work. But if we do have a problem, I may ask you to intervene.
That's what we like to have it. I think we've only needed it a couple of times, but you might feel a little better with a little safety behind you. Okay, sir, we're ready to go. If everybody can put their mutes on.
Are you able to see the screen?
We're good.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, first of all. As some of you know, I lived down in the Westchester area for a number of years, very good friend of Bill Schultz and a variety of other people in the Pennsylvania philatelic community. So it's a pleasure to make a presentation to you folks tonight. The subject of the presentation really comes out of my years of
We've lost your voice.
thick or otherwise unwieldy, it takes special mounting techniques to be able to put it into a frame as you would see it at a philatelic exhibition. So over the years, I've developed techniques and as well as exhibits, and I've presented these in various formats, seminars, publications. I've done a number of APS summer seminars on this, not this exact subject, but on exhibiting this type of material and mounting this type of material. So you're going to see an encapsulated version of what's in the book and all of these lectures and seminars that I've given over the years. I won't go through my credentials because that was done nicely by Paul. These are just some examples of the books that I have published. Most of them are on my display exhibits. The one that Paul was mentioning in the upper right-hand corner is the Vorbeck exhibit. There's also one on Joseph Piłsudski. There's one on the Hitler Youth and one on Winter Hilf's work. I do a number of German exhibits because I'm a member of the Germany Philatelic Society and just enjoy the history associated with World War I and World War II as well. The most recent book is the one in the center, which is the one that has won a number of awards, and I'm gratified that it's been accepted very well by the collecting community. So what we're going to do today is walk through what philatelic and paraphilatelic material are as they relate to collections and exhibits. And then we'll get into ephemera and artifacts, explain what those are and how to use them. Then get into some of these specialized mounting techniques that you might find useful for collections as well as exhibits. In fact, everything I'm going to talk about today relates to the collector as much as it does to the exhibitor, because an exhibit is really an expansion of a collection when you come right down to it. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions at the end. So when we talk about philatelic material, I mean, we all know what philatelic material is. Stamps, we talk about stamps all the time. But rather than just showing stamps, we can enhance our collections and we can enhance our exhibits by including additional types of philatelic material. Some of it a little more difficult to obtain, perhaps, than the routine stamps and covers that we're used to. But that also is what makes it a little richer in terms of its presentation, whether it's in a collection for your own benefit, or if it's something you're going to be displaying for the public, such as an exhibition. So there's really a plethora of philatelic choices that you can make, but you have to think out of the box a little bit in terms of the types of philatelic material that you might want to enhance your collection or exhibit with. Examples we'll go through are archival material, production material, various types of uses, or just plain unusual material that is still considered under the APS manual as being philatelic. So let's talk about archival material a little bit. Archival material we think of proofs and we think of essays, trial color proofs and so forth, but original drawings, whether they're rejected designs or they're designs that were accepted for actual use in a stamp, are also legitimate pieces of archival material. So I've used these in a number of my topical exhibits and also in one of my thematic exhibits. This example here is an introductory page from one of my topical exhibits on hats. And it relates to an issue of stamps from San Marino that featured knights at jousts. Here's an example, again, from the hats topical exhibit. And in this case, you see the farmer here.
Think we lost them again.
Artwork
Oh.
for the stamp. You can see the stamp over here on the right-hand side. This is from a thematic exhibit, and this shows what we call in judging a mini study, or a smaller version of a mini study. A mini study essentially is when you show multiple aspects of the same stamp. So here you see the original artwork on the bottom. Above it is the issued stamp, and to the right is a windowed portion of a first day cover showing both an illustrated cancel of the stamp image as well as the stamp being canceled by the first day. Other types of archival material to consider are photo essays. Again, these can be either photo essays of accepted material or rejected material. It's still legitimate to use them. Black proofs, these are quite common now, and you see a lot of black proofs being issued by various countries. If you're showing black proofs, or if you're going to show them in a collection or in an exhibit, I generally recommend that the issued stamp be shown with the black proof, so the individual viewing the material can see if there are any differences between the two. It's also interesting to look for original art that '37 in a Polish exhibit that I have. And I found the postcard that was actually used, the image on the postcard that was actually used by the engraver to make the stamp. So it's sort of an interesting harmonization of being able to show a non-philatelic item, such as a picture postcard, with a philatelic item. It sort of enriches the presentation that you're making and the story that you're telling. Another example from one of my early thematic exhibits on Jan Christian Smuts, who was the premier of South Africa, a very famous man during World War II. And this is the original photograph. It's an archival copy that was used by the engraver to make the stamp. And again, this is a mini study in a way, because there's a block here that has a minor error associated with one of the stamps on the block, but it also has a windowed first day in addition to showing the pre-production art material that was used for the stamp. And then there's errors, freaks, and oddities. I know you had a recent talk by somebody on fold-over errors, so you understand a little bit more about what errors are versus freaks and oddities. But there's a whole bunch of these things that can really enrich a collection or enrich an exhibit. Again, if you're showing one of these types of things, I generally like or recommend that you show the issued stamp along with it. Again, so the viewer can see what the differences might be between the error and the actual issued stamp. So here you've got a stamp that was issued, but also examples of printer's waste where it was printed on some old maps. Other examples of different types of errors. The top example is a set-off error where the ink, where sheets are laid one on top of the other, and the wet ink adheres to the back of the stamp, giving a reverse image. It's called a set-off. We know about color errors, of course, missing colors or incorrect colors, an example in the lower right-hand corner. And of course, perforation errors, which are quite common, but can be quite dramatic, as this poster stamp is almost split in two by the misperforation. Some more examples of errors: double overprinting, double perforations, vertical imperforates, pre-printing paper crease. Here's another example of a mini study that's also showing some errors. The upper right-hand corner is one of these Frama stamps that was actually used as postage. On top of the cover, covering the address, are two void test stamps of the same Charlie Brown stamp. And in the upper left corner are inverted printing, so that the black print was inverted. And you can see the difference between the mailed copy and the one on the left. And don't forget about booklets. Booklets can offer a lot. They're not only an expansion of a stamp design, but sometimes the outside of the booklets can carry interesting images that you might use in topical collections, or you can use in exhibits where you're trying to create a theme. So in my hats exhibit, which this is from, I show these two covers of booklets because there are hats involved of different types. Also, say tenant stamps, especially ones with labels. The say tenants give you two stamps for the price of one, so to speak, when you're showing material. But if you have, say, tenants that also have labels associated with them, they can add additional interest. Or the exhibit. Meters can be quite interesting because some meters are illustrated so that the image can be used in topical collecting, or it can be used in thematic exhibits to drive a story. So meters are another important addition to the use. Here's an example of something from a Polish exhibit that shows an actual letter that was used in the Polish legions by the 1st Brigade. So it's not only an interesting piece of Polish history, but postal history as well. And then there's illustrated mail. Illustrated mail can provide all kinds of images that are useful in telling a story or expanding a collection or expanding a theme. This example here is an advertisement for a type of mustard and mayonnaise. It also mentions pickles, so theoretically it could be used for a variety of different things. It could even fit in the hats topical exhibit that I have because the chef is wearing a hat, a toque. Here's an example of another type of illustrated mail. This one's sort of ironic because it shows a Quaker advertising Pure Peter 5-cent cigars. And of course, Quakers abstain from tobacco and alcohol both, but provided apparently a good image for the company that was selling their cigars. And then there's V-mail. It's an unusual type of postal history, and it's time limited primarily by the Second World War, but these can have interesting comical and historical images associated with them. So again, they can be used in a variety of different ways to enhance a collection or to expand an exhibit. And then there are maxi cards. These are two examples of maxi cards, and I'll explain exactly what a maxi card is by definition. We refer to three-point concordance with maxi cards. The three components are a picture postcard that has an image on it, and the size of the card generally has to conform with the UPU conventions. So it's a standard picture postcard. In Europe, they're larger than they are in the United States. Then there's a stamp, and the stamp has to have an image that relates to the picture. Lastly, there's cancel, and the cancel has to tie the stamp to the cover, and it also has to either be a first day cancel or have an illustration on it that would match the subject of the picture. So in this case, you've got a picture of Clara Bow wearing a hat, a stamp of Clara Bow wearing a hat, and a first day cancel. So it's 3-point concordance. Then there's the unusual philatelic material that we often don't think about. All those souvenir sheets that get published by philatelic shows, especially small shows that used to be from the 1920s all the way up through the present day, they can have very interesting subjects a lot of times. Sometimes they show images of actual stamps or historic events. So they can be used in a whole variety of different ways to enhance a collection or to expand an exhibit. Then there are personal postage stamps, Zazzle stamps, computer.com stamps, or stamps.com rather. Even toy stamps, if they have an image center, has a label attached to it. So sometimes the labels have images that can be quite useful. Revenue stamps often have images associated with them. Strike mail from the 1970s in England, 1971 period, often have very interesting images associated with them for topical collections or for use in thematic exhibits or in thematic collections. And then there's framers, which are the same essentially of which there are a myriad, of course, in many different countries. These are all considered philatelic material. A lot of them are Cinderellas, but they still fall under the rubric of philatelic material. Then there's the unusual, such as letter seals. Again, these are labels, but they're Cinderellas, so they're philatelic material. Etiquettes, such as registry etiquettes or airmail etiquettes, are also interesting because they often carry the names of individual cities that can be used to expand collections. Rocket mail is interesting. Many countries have different types of rocket mail that can be used in various collections. Revenues can be shown either as individual stamps or, more interestingly, they can be shown how they were used. In this case, from my Hitler Youth exhibit, this is a dues book for the showing the stamps that were put in at each period to show that they had paid the proper tax. There are pictorial revenues also, in addition to standard revenue stamps. And sometimes the images on these can be quite useful, again, in thematic or topical types of collections or exhibits. And even beer labels. In the 1930s in the United States, a lot of beer labels were actually revenue tax paid revenues, internal revenue tax paid. So as long as it says on the label internal revenue tax paid, it's actually a philatelic item, even though it's a beer label. So the images associated with the label can then be used in a variety of different ways in collections or exhibits. Another example of one of these tax-paid beer labels. And then there are college stamps. College stamps, you may recall, were used mainly in secretarial colleges where people were learning how to handle mail and do various types of office work. And they used facsimiles of postage stamps and postal cards. In this case, this is a rather rare example of a facsimile postal card showing a Quaker. And then there particular cause. Obviously, postage stamps were used for advertising as well. So then we get into paraphilatelic material. What exactly is paraphilatelic material? Well, I created my own definition of it. In essence, it's anything that's distributed by a legitimate postal authority that ties in with stamps or the issuance of stamps. So it can deal with advertising, it can deal with production and distribution, it can deal with ceremonies and special events, or it can deal with a collecting aspect such as PHQ cards, which I'll show in a few minutes. What's shown right here is the top card, or what's referred to as a top card. These aren't usually available on a regular basis because they only come to the post office on the top of a stack of the sheets, and they're usually discarded by the postal workers. But sometimes they end up out into the public domain, and when they do, they can add a lot of interest to a collection or to an exhibit. So here you see the Edna Ferber stamp, and that's the top card that was used for the stack of sheets. Another example of something that can be used are mailing tags. The bottom one The US Post Office also puts out, as do other postal authorities, a variety of advertising. When you go to the post office to buy stamps, you often see a whole bunch of magnets sitting on the counter showing you the current stamps that are available if you want to buy a particular denomination. They also had photographs. You see in the upper right-hand corner a photograph that they would distribute to newspapers and other agencies to use in advertising the issuance of a stamp. So putting that of advertising along with the stamps, again, enhances it and expands the collection. As long as it has on it that it's actually a US Postal Service or whatever the Postal Service is, as long as it has some indication on the item that it was issued by them, then it's legitimate to use it as paraphilatelic material. Another example, this is a negative that was a color negative that would be used for publication of advertising for the issuance of a new stamp. A lot of countries send out circulars or stamp announcement cards, and that's what this is. It's a stamp announcement card for a Christmas issue from Greece. Here is a ceremony leaflet issued by the Philatelic Service in the Netherlands, showing an image of the stamp, and then below it shows the actual issued stamp. So These can be first day ceremonies. They can be all different types of ceremonial pamphlets, as long as they show an image of the actual stamp. PHQ cards refer to postal headquarters cards that are issued by the Royal Post in Britain. And they started putting these out a number of years back. So when an issue would come out, they would issue a set of picture postcards blown up to show the actual stamp. On the back side, it shows that it's actually published by the Royal Post. So these are legitimate paraphilatelic material. So as you can see, there's a lot of philatelic and paraphilatelic material that we don't normally think of as we think about our collections that can be used to expand those collections. In addition to those, there's the non-philatelic material, and that's where we come to ephemera and artifacts. Now, ephemera is defined by the dictionary as things that exist or are used for a short period of time. So this is the stuff we normally throw away. The philatelic definition is expanded a little bit, and it refers to this type of material as being two-dimensional. Artifacts, on the other hand, are again objects that are made by someone, typically an item of cultural or historical significance, but not necessarily. For philatelic definition, we expand that as something being three-dimensional. So the difference between, as far as we're concerned, for collections and exhibits of ephemera and artifacts, is one is two-dimensional and one is three-dimensional. So what are these non-philatelic elements that you can use to expand your collection or to expand your exhibit? Well, coins and currency are a very common thing that's used. Currencies have different denominations. They often have very interesting images, sometimes historical significance. Coins similarly can have different kinds of images associated with them, both of historic value and also of interest in expanding a collection or matching up with a stamp or a topic that you might be presenting. Medals, decorations, and awards. These are very common in military, but also there are all different kinds of awards that are given and medals that are given for commemoration of events, as well as for honoring individuals. So any of these can be used in appropriate types of exhibits, and certainly can be used to expand collections. Cigarette cards, cigarette silks, trading cards. Mostly these were advertising, but they were also collectibles. So they would generally be published in series, so that if you remember the cigarette card series of days gone by, they would cover famous individuals, they would cover presidents of the United States, they may cover automobiles of different types of airplanes, whatever it might happen to be. So here you see a grouping of examples from various exhibits that I have showing trade cards, cigarette cards, and a cigarette silk. In the case of the cigarette silk, I'm showing it alongside of a stamp that shows the very same metal that I'm referring to in the exhibit. And then there's unusual items like matchbook covers, decals, badges, buttons, pretty much anything you can think of that has an image on it or has a historic significance to the collection that you have or the exhibit that you're presenting, can be of interest to expand your material. Receipts. There's all different types of receipts, from the mundane to those that are illustrated and have historic significance. Photographs. photographs are really good, but you have to be careful in making sure that you're using an actual photograph and not a reproduction. Generally, the back of photographs that are used for newspaper purposes have hand stamps on them that indicate when they were used and what publication, and give other information, usually about the photographer or the type of press that was used to distribute them. When showing a photograph, it's often useful to show how it was used. So in this case, this is part of my Hitler Youth exhibit, and we're talking about Hitler and when he was named chancellor. So this is the photograph that was cropped to use for the newspaper article that was talking about him. So there's an image of the newspaper article in addition to the actual photograph. Here again is a photograph showing a couple individuals that relate to some of the stamps that are shown on the page. You don't have to show the entire photograph, especially if it's too large. You can crop out and just window that portion of the photograph that's important to show, as I've done here. What I always like to do then is show a smaller image of the entire photograph so the viewer can appreciate where the photo came from, what it looked like in its entirety. And don't forget old-fashioned stereo view cards, which can be quite interesting and carry a lot of historic information. Then there are autographs. If you have a collection that involves specific individuals, getting an autograph of that individual can be quite nice to enhance your collection. In this case, these are from 3 different exhibits. The von Lito-Vorbeck exhibit up top, I have his signature. Adolf Hitler's signature is on the lower right. And then the rector of a university in Warsaw was from one of my Polish exhibits. Pretty much anything else you can think of, if it relates to the topic that you're collecting or that you're presenting in an exhibit, you can use. So QSL cards, which are radio frequency cards for ham operators. In my Winter Hilfswerk exhibit, the WHW, or Winter Hilfswerk, was a winter charity that the Nazis had. And each year when they would solicit funds over the winter months, they would give away little trinkets. These were badges or pins or little items you could hang on your Christmas tree. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of these things. In fact, there's catalogs of them, and people are avid collectors of these WHW artifacts. But I use them in the Winter Hilfswerk exhibit to show the great variety of these types that were available. Obviously, newspaper clippings and even magazine covers can be used in an exhibit. On the right-hand side, the entire page of the exhibit is the cover, and I've overlaid it with the information that's necessary to convey why the cover is there. Similarly, on the left is part of a page from an exhibit that talks about the coup d'etat that happened in Poland in the 1930s and 1920s, rather, excuse me. And overlaying it are stamps that relate to 2 of the individuals that were involved in this coup d'etat. So how do you use all this? Want to convert, say, a thematic exhibit to a display exhibit or a topical exhibit to a display exhibit. You can do that by adding non-philatelic material. I go into quite a bit of detail in the book about how to do this. But in essence, a display treatment for an exhibit, which would be the same for a collection, is just the addition of non-philatelic material. General rule of thumb is that in judging one of these exhibits, that the philatelic material has to carry the exhibit. So you got to have more philatelic material than you have non-philatelic material. I use the 60-40 rule myself as a general break. It doesn't have to be, it can be much closer. It theoretically could be 51% philatelic, but to err on the side of making the judges comfortable, 60-40 is a good ratio. So how does this apply to a collection? Well, as I explained a little bit as I was going through the different types of materials, non-philatelic materials complement the philatelic items that you're showing in your collection or your exhibit. They also can extend the story or the theme. They certainly provide interest. They certainly provide context. And in many cases, they can provide history. So I showed this cover earlier as an example of postal history because it's a nice cover, but you notice it has a letter seal on it on the left-hand side. Well, what if I showed that same cover on a page with a mint letter seal and also an example of other letter seals that were also produced by the WHW as a means of raising money? So when you made a donation in a particular year, you could get your choice of a letter seal or maybe one of those little artifacts you could put on your Christmas tree. And to show that you had donated to the WHW, you use the letter seal on your letters. Similarly, the example I showed earlier of a piece of postal history from the Polish Legion's 1st Brigade can be enhanced if I show an actual badge from the 1st Brigade. So it ties in very nicely with the cover that I was showing. Using material together also creates a harmonization. This is a page from a topical exhibit, so it's on hats. So every item on this page has something to do with a hat, as you can see. In fact, these are all postmen, so every hat on this page is a postman's hat. But there's harmonization up top right away because I've got the black proof shown next to the actual issued stamp. Well, let's take it a little further. The two items I've circled here, we have a strike mail showing a service cap from a postman, and next to it is a German stamp showing almost the identical service hat that's being worn in a different time period. But it emphasizes the point that the service hat is a common hat amongst postal workers. Another example, the stamp on the left shows an older version of a postman wearing a top hat. And the souvenir sheet in the center from Buffalo, New York, shows on the left-hand side a postman wearing a top hat. And on the right-hand side, the typical service cap that was familiar in the 1940s. And to the right of that, stamp and an engraving from a US Postal Service souvenir sheet that show the same service hat. So it creates this harmonization and ties it all together. So here are some sample pages from some display exhibits. In this case, you see a philatelic item of postal history in the upper right-hand corner. Next in the left side is a revenue stamp, and then at the bottom is a piece of currency. Each of these has below is an actual cover from the book that he wrote in 1920. This page does not have any philatelic items. It's all non-philatelic. And in this case, it's the subject is the woman who is a pilot in the lower right-hand photograph. The school she went to is depicted by the postcard in the center of the page. And at the top of the page are the wings that were, the bullion wings that were given to these pilots during 1942 for the Air Transport Association. Another page example, here we've got a stamp on the upper left. We've got black print or black proof on the upper right. There's a map in the center of the page. It's an actual map. It's not a scan of a map. So the map is behind the page and it's been windowed to show the important aspect of the map that I'm trying to delineate. And then at the bottom of the page, again, some current First of all, you have to decide what you want to use. You know, a collection has a finite endpoint, and accumulation is just what it sounds like. It's just an accumulation of material with no real endpoint. You can keep adding to it. And then an exhibit. An exhibit has a finite beginning, middle, and an end. So it is even more restricted than a collection. You have to think about the relevancy of adding material to either or all of these. There are certain limitations that we'll discuss with regard to exhibits. And there may be limitations with collections and accumulations also because of size or physical characteristics of material that you otherwise might want to collect. Ron Lesher used to collect revenue stamps and, well, shows revenue stamps on a regular basis, but he had a big collection of the stamps actually used on bottles. And he figured out a way to actually display these at a show once, but obviously he couldn't put them in an album because of the physical limitations of the bottles. So there are these physical limitations you have to consider. Some shows impose guidelines on what type of material can or cannot go into the frames. Generally, it's nothing that would inhibit you from collecting various material. The biggest limitation is thickness, because if it's over 1/4 inch thick, it's going to be hard to close the frame. So let's talk about how you mount these materials if you're going to put them in a collection on album pages or if you're going to use them in an exhibit. I go into much more detail in the book, but I'll give sort of the basics here. There are certain tools that you have to have. A magnetic cutting board or a self-healing cutting board is really good with a razor knife so you can break off and keep having a nice sharp edge. Archival mounts for corner mounts, always make sure they're archival. If you're using photo sticker squares, make sure they're acid-free and archival. I use Post-it notes a lot, and I'll explain how. These are archival, so they can be used. And an essential tool, if you're an exhibitor at least, is to have a home frame. You can make one yourself very easily. This is a piece of 48 by 36 inch cardboard, has weather strips across it at certain intervals, and then piece of string or tape to hold the pages into the channels of the weather stripping. That way you can see what it's going to look like at a show if you're mounting an exhibit. Papers and mats. Papers are important because the color helps helps you show the material that you're really trying to show, which is your philatelic or your non-philatelic material. Mats can also make things pop off the page. I use a paper color test when I'm starting a new exhibit. This can be done for collections just as well. Essentially, what you do is you mount your material on a piece of white paper, and then make several color copies. Cut the elements off of the copies. And now you print a new page of whatever color you want, yellow, gray, blue. And you're going to lay these on the pages to decide which one looks the best. So here's an example of the colored copies that have been cut off the page. And now their colored copies are laid on white paper, gray paper, and ecru paper. So immediately I can see the difference of the material that I'm using and which of these is going to make the material stand out best on the page. It's a very easy test to do, and you can do it with all different color papers. Paper size and format is also important. I mean, we tend to use 8.5 by 11 pages, but oversized pages are becoming more and more popular in exhibiting and even in collections. The 11 by 17 size, which is essentially a double page, is nice because you can now find high capacity sheet protectors for these and printers that will easily print this type of material. Oops. So here's an example of a page, a double page. And you can see that by using a double page, I can get much more material than I could on two separate pages. It allows you much more flexibility to put large items on the page. Here's another example of a double page. These are printed boxes. And again, in the book, I go into a lot of detail about using printed templates for enhancing your material on your album pages or on your exhibit pages. I use printed templates all the time. This is the material that's been mounted on those templates. It looks like they're matted. They're not matted. That's the mat. It's printed on the page. And that's the point. You can use physical mats if you want, but if you can print them on the page, it's a lot easier and you don't have to cut out the mats and so forth. You can also use double pages to make quarter panels. So for one of my revenue exhibits, I had to use quarter panels. So there were 4 quarter panels on in each frame. And what they are is they're 2 double pages together, mounted on a piece of foam board. And it worked really well. As I say, matting is an individual choice. So some people don't want to mat. Some people will use mounts that are either black mounts or clear mounts. I tend to think that shadow boxing, which is on the left-hand side, really makes items pop off the page. But printed mats are fine. It's a personal choice. Or you can cut your own mats, either way. The nice thing about mats that you print is you can do all kinds of different things with computers nowadays. You can make them all different sizes. You can shadow them. You can make them colored to point out rarity or unusual items. Different sizes, different shapes. So it's real easy to use. Picking a color that contrasts with your page. Here's two examples. Either one of these would work with the ecru, the gray or the maroon. Here's two examples from my exhibits. The left-hand side, the colors are very subtle. These are physical mats. These are not printed mats in this case. On the right-hand side, maroon is used, and you can see the difference. It makes the items pop a little more off the page. Also notice in the middle of that page, there's a rare item. So I've double matted it with maroon and white so it stands out. Maroon mats can be very useful because they do make material pop off the page quite a bit. So how do you mount material? Well, we all know about hinges. We all know about plastic mounts. If you're going to use them, I would not use black. It's very distracting, especially in exhibits. And then there's corner mounts, of course, but I use a Post-it note technique and mounting squares. And then there are special techniques for unusual items, and I'll show you some of those. The Post-it note technique, I've researched over the years. I've contacted 3M. I've gotten archival information. If you talk to archivists at the Postal Museum, they'll say, don't use them. I've used them for 10 years on expensive material, mint material, doesn't matter. I've never had a problem, except if I'm using old, very friable paper, like documents, where they're not acid-free documents. They tend to get powdery. And if you use Post-it notes on them, they can tear. So you just test the material if you're going to use the Post-it note technique. But the technique is quite simple. You use the sticky part of the Post-it note that you put on your philatelic material. So the adhesive side of the Post-it note is attached to the gum side of the stamp, as you see here. Then you put a double-sided adhesive square, photo square, on the Post-it note. You remove the blue material and you've got a sticky side showing. Now it's ready to mount. Fabric items are a little more difficult to deal with because fabric adhesives generally don't stick very well to fabric. And in this case, it didn't. And in the frame, it was falling out of its designated spot, as you can see. So needle and thread. And in this case, I've used needle and the front side. So just make sure that you're putting your thread in correctly. This is the mounted object and what it looks like on the back with the knots that tie it and secure it to the page. Windowing is also useful because when you're dealing with non-philatelic items in particular, and you have very large items that may be distracting or too large for the whole page, there's only a portion of that item that you might want to show. So windowing is probably the best way to do it. There's two ways you can window. One is called a slit technique, where you make a slit in two directions and slide your material through. The lower right-hand corner shows what it looks like on the mounted page. The problem with this is it shows two of the edges of the material. So if they're ragged, it's going to show the ragged edge. Windowing, on the other hand, covers that ragged edge. You have a very neat box that you just cut off the page. That was printed on the page. Then you use a sharp knife to cut it out, leaving the frame. And then you mount your material behind the page. So on the left-hand side, you see the windowed piece. Next to it is the piece with the ragged edges showing as the slit. If the edges of an item are really clean, you can simply mat it. You don't really have to worry about windowing it. So all of the material on this page is matted. And these are physical mats, they're not printed mats. Here's material windowed, and you can see the very neat, very crisp look to it. With photographs, as I mentioned before, you only want to show the portion of the photograph that's of interest. It's often nice to show the whole photograph so the viewer gets an appreciation of what that looked like and if there's relevant information associated with it. In this case, at the bottom of that photograph on the left is the press release information, so it shows that it is an actual press photograph. Another piece of fabric, in this case, instead of sewing it on, it was taped on using painter's tape. Worked just as well. It's not archival though, so over time it may discolor the page, but there are archival tapes that can also be used. I also use a lot of overlays and transparencies because they give you much better space utilization. They avoid covering important aspects of your elements that you're trying to show or for your collection or your exhibit. And they avoid damaging material with adhesive arrows or other kinds of shapes. First, let's talk about some overlays. Overlays are simply taking information that you want to put on a page and using it rather than on the page on a particular philatelic item. In this case, it's just adhered to the address portion of the postal stationery that you see here. The address, of course, not being of any interest. Since there wasn't any room on the page, this was a convenient way to provide the information that was necessary. Here, the entire page is a magazine cover, and overlaying it are information boxes. In the lower left-hand corner is a cover, and above the cover is a stamp that's also overlaying. So you have the ability to you got a silver medal, and if you were a poor woman with only 4 to 5 kids, you got a bronze medal. But anyway, here's the actual certificate with an example of that medal overlaying on top of it. So the entire certificate becomes the page in the exhibit. And the information is overlaid and adhered to that certificate using the Post-it note technique so that nothing hurts the actual document. Let's talk about mounting thick objects, coins, medals, booklets, and so forth. You can use a 1/8 to a 1/4 inch foam board, or you can just stack multiple layers of cardstock to whatever thickness you want to make the image, to encapsulate essentially the item that you're trying to mount. You can get foam board that's archival, but it's somewhat expensive, but you can get it. There's several different ways to mount thicker material. You can just surface mount it, as I've done here. And you can see from the side view, that's about 1/8 of an inch thick. So it's got plenty of clearance for closing the frame. Similarly, here's a medal, and it's about, again, 1/8 of an inch thick. So it can be mounted just with an adhesive onto the page. In this case, the metal was put, or the badge was put on a mat, and then the mat was mounted to the page. Same technique used here, except these were sewn on. So at the waist, there's thread that are holding these in place. These are little cutouts in the page so that the objects, while they're thick, tend to drop down into the page just a little bit, but not all the way. It gives them a little depth, so it gives them more interest. Here's an example of one shown on the side view, and you can see how it humps out of the window that I've created. Now, if you got really thick objects, like this badge here, you have to drop it down into the page. So here you can see on the side view the foam board that was used. So the material is actually mounted on the back of the page, and there's a foam board that's covering it that's been cut out to allow you to see it from the surface. So it looks like it's at the plane of the page when you look at it. I'll show you this technique in a minute. Here are three objects we're going to mount. One's a big fat key, one's a badge, and one's a piece of fabric. Now the fabric, because it's thin, can be mounted right on the page, but it's got a ragged edge, so you don't want to do that. You want to window it, so you only see the portion of that fabric that you want to show. Theoretically, the badge you could also mount right on the page, unless you want to enhance it by dropping it down a bit. The key, on the other hand, couldn't be mounted on the top of the page. It's too thick, so it has to be dropped down to the bottom of the page, the back of the page. So what do? Well, the first thing we do is decide where these items are going to go on the page. And then we create boxes using our computer for each of these objects. We print those boxes on a page. That's going to be our backing page. And instead of open boxes, the way you see them here, they can be colored. They don't have to be open. So only the outline is showing. You could actually have colors if you want. Next, we take foam board and we mark those boxes on the foam board, so we know where to cut out the foam board. And we have to cut it out at least 1/8 of an inch larger than the actual hole that's going to be on the top page, because we don't want to show the edges of the foam board. So here we cut it out. These are, again, are a 1/4 inch larger than they have to be. Now I've colored a couple of these. So we print the back page. We're loading up the material that's going on it, adhering it however it's going to adhere best. In the case of the key, I had to use thread to hold it on. Next, we lay the foam board on top of the back page. And notice that we've mounted the fabric right onto the foam board, because remember, the fabric is just going to be windowed. Now we print the top page, cut out all the holes on the top page, and layer it. So you have a sandwich. You've got the bottom page with your elements on it, the foam board with holes cut in it so that the elements show, and a top page with holes cut out to show the elements. Here's another example of the technique. In this case, just using cardboard, because the badge that I'm showing, the pin that's in the little triangle there, is not that thick. But I did want to drop it down into the page. I didn't want it sitting right on the surface of the page. So it's mounted. A piece of cardboard is cut, so there's a window for it. The page is printed. The triangle's cut out of the page so that you can show the pin. Using the Post-it note technique, some more examples. This is from the von Lito-Forbeck exhibit. And the iron cross in the middle of this page is embedded all the way to the bottom of the back of the page, because it's about a 1/4 inch thick. But it looks like it's on the surface of the page when you look at it. That's the whole point of it. This case was a 1/4 inch thick. And yet I was able to get it in and it worked well. This was about a 1/4 inch thick. This is more for exhibitors than for anybody else, but it also applies to collections. If you don't have a frame at home or a homemade frame, you can lay pages out on the floor to see what they're going to look like when they're all together. And I suggest that you stand back and you look at the overall color scheme. Is it too harsh? Does it offend the eyes? Is there clutter and overcrowding of material? Do you have diagonal material that distracts as opposed to being on double pages? Are there very large pieces that distract and maybe could be placed differently or windowed? Is there too much white space or is there too much text? And then you make corrections as appropriate. For those of you who do go to shows, some tips, and again, the book has lots more of this stuff in it. Always submit a title page and a synopsis. Date your submitted material. So if you send in an amended copy, the judges and the show committee will know which is the most recent version. If you're mounting your own exhibit, bring along this stuff. It's wonderful. Scotch brand wall safe tape. A lot of these frames have very bad channels in them and the pages don't want to stay upright. I use blue painter tape on the back in a loop so that the glue is on the inside out, and that holds the page to the frame, and it doesn't hurt the frame. But you can also use this wall safe tape to do the same thing. Extra corner mounts and other mounts in case something comes loose. Channel grip blocker is really important, because if you've ever tried to close these frames and then screw in that bottom screw, it's a killer sometimes. And if you've got a channel lock gripper, it will hold that frame closed for you while you put that screw in. And usually these things are dusty and scratched and all the rest. So bring along some glass cleaner and paper towels. And that will help make it look a little more presentable. So that's pretty much it. I realized that was, it's a 3-day summer seminar. Email address. So I'm happy to entertain questions.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I found it very interesting that if you only had 3 to 5 kids, you were a piker. And I think if you have 5 kids today, it's a big deal. Questions for Ed?
Yeah.
Do we have anybody have any
So
questions?
I have a question. Hi, this is Jamil. Regarding the black prints, some black prints in particular, like Austrian ones, they usually come, glued to a brochure that explains, the significance of the stamp and other data about the stamp.
Yeah.
What do you do? Do you just window it? Usually they are those brochures, they are European size A4, and
Right.
they won't fit, our pages. So how do you deal with that? Do you cut it, or what do you do?
Well, if you're using A4 pages, of course, it's not an issue because then you can simply window it to accommodate the stamp. Otherwise, the only alternative is unfortunately to cut it, which a lot of people do.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Ed, you mentioned Cinderellas.
Yeah.
We're having a program coming up in August on Cinderellas, but I think you're fading in and out a few times, and I don't know if I caught it. Are Cinderellas considered philatelic?
Yes, they are.
They are, okay. As long as it has to do with the topic, is that how it works?
Thank you.
Exhibit, it has to relate specifically to the storyline that you're telling, whether
Okay.
whether you're discussing a philatelic subject or a non-philatelic subject, like the life of an individual or the story of Wales or whatever it happens to be. Yeah.
So if you're doing something on FDR,
Yeah,
use some of his Cinderellas or a campaign button or things like that.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And then my other question is related to display class. So display class is when you add in the extra material. Are those judged by themselves as display, or can they go up against everything else and win a grand award?
Okay, let me, the 17th edition changed classes and divisions. There are 4 classes of exhibits. There's youth exhibits. There's philatelic literature exhibits. There are general class exhibits. And then there are one frame class exhibits. That's it, 4 classes.
Okay.
So for a multi-frame exhibit, it's judged as a general class exhibit. The treatment is display versus traditional treatment versus postal history treatment versus revenue treatment. Okay, so it's not judged as anything different. It's simply judged and you're being judged against what you stated you were going to do
Okay.
on that title page.
So in the old days, if you had a Graf Zeppelin exhibit showing stamps and covers, and you put in a couple postcards and maps, that would have been verboten, right? But now it'd be considered, it'd be okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay. Gotcha. I like that. I like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Other questions, people? I think, in addition to, for exhibitors and judges, I think you brought up a lot of interesting things to add. One of my main areas is like the 1939 World's Fair, and some of the things you brought up, I want to add to that.
Oh, boy, yeah. I mean, all the souvenirs,
Yeah, exactly.
all kinds of stuff.
Well, I have a collection of stamp show pins. I've been a friend sent me, I'm trying to think of the best way to mount them, not necessarily for an exhibit, but at least to have them in an album, so when I croak, they won't be, thrown out in the cigar box. They'll
Yeah.
at least go to the auction house in an album. And I'm trying to think of some ways to do that. But yeah, it's very, very creative. I like it.
Good, good.
Okay.
Dr. Andrews, you had one slide up there with, it looked like a brass, almost like a lighter or something like that, but you had a lanyard on it that was stapled on the surface, it looked like.
Yeah.
So
right.
that's acceptable, or?
That was a tobacco case, actually.
a
There was
tobacco
one
case,
around the
okay.
neck. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, yeah, sure, that's acceptable.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I remember seeing an exhibit. First time I ever saw anything other than really two-dimensional. And going back now, I think of it, it might have been in one Ron Lesher's, the different seals that had to be broken.
Oh, yeah.
For revenue. And
Right.
they're quite big. And I think
Yep.
he must built out the exhibit frames or something for those, but it was
Yep.
very creative.
Yeah. In cases like that, you have to contact the show committee and get permission to do that. Ron's done a couple of those sort of innovative display things with frames over the years.
Yeah, we're fortunate, Ron. We usually have Ron once a year for something, and Bill Schultz. They've been some of our mainstays, and Bill's
Right.
a member of our club, and we always
Yep.
enjoy having him. Yep. Okay. Other questions, people?
I got a question, please.
Yep.
I am working on one now. I haven't seen one recently, but doing some panels on a stamp designer. Okay. Obviously, we have a lot of historical folks that have gone into the designing of the U.S. stamps. And one particular person that I would like to do a theme on has made about 24 stamps, designed about 24 stamps. If I wanted to display the souvenir page or the souvenir panel along with the stamp and the first day cover, would I put all of those on one? Should I make them, how do I say it? Just make copies and make smaller souvenir panels and make smaller souvenir pages and fit them like that, or try to keep them in their original size?
Well, original is always better, but in some cases, practicality intervenes. And because of size or other physical limitations, you can't do it. In which case you can take an image, a reduced image of the material, and just explain what it is. And that's fine, as long as the whole exhibit isn't filled with reduced images.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Mike Wilson. Just a question about the single frame versus multi-frame exhibits. Is a single frame a good place for a novice exhibitor to start to get his feet wet in the whole topic?
No,
No. Okay.
single frames are actually quite hard to do. By definition, a single frame has to be a complete story in 16 pages or equivalents thereof. So you have to, it's a trap that people fall into. They take a big exhibit and they'll pull out 16 pages of the exhibit. And what's going to happen is the judges are going to say, this subject does not fit 16 pages. It's much larger. This can fit 5 frames, and you're going to be 5 points off right away. If it's an 8-frame exhibit, 8 points off right away. So no, it's generally not for novice. I would recommend starting with something very simple. 2 to 3 frames, a simple story that you can tell and expand upon as you get more material. there's a lot of societies mentoring, and these are free of charge, like American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors does mentoring. And they're more than happy to help people with ideas for exhibits, how to get started, counsel you as you go through the process.
Like I said, Ed, you're fading in and out, so I hope I'm not cutting you off because, anyway, I just want to mention too that ATA is, they have a call for one-page exhibits, usually in the fall of the year, and that's an interesting way to get into to try exhibiting. But Ed, maybe if you could comment on the state of exhibiting. Are we still getting exhibitors? Are they still being born and growing? And are judges still wanting to become judges and things like that? Or like so many things are just kind of compressing?
No, I think judging is in good shape. You know, when I was on Canage, we had some problems recruiting people, but I see a much younger crowd now coming through. So there are younger judges coming along. Most of us are getting to the point where, you know, I'm 82 and I'm ready to hang up my spurs, so to speak. Bill Schultz has already retired from judging. There's quite a few that are retiring. But there's plenty of judges that are coming along. So I think judging is fine. The big problem is shows. There are more and more shows that are closing down or going from a 3-day to a 2-day show. And those are the venues for exhibitors. So while there's exhibitors out there willing to go to the shows, they have to have shows to go to.
Are the virtual exhibits, could that be a bit of a lifeline, or
Well,
like them in real?
yeah, I suppose that's a big controversy right now about judging virtual exhibits. I'm judging one right now, SAVPEX, which is South African Veterinary Association, had a virtual exhibit during the pandemic, and I was the U.S. commissioner and on the jury, and they asked me on the jury again this year, so I'm doing it again, and it's again virtual, and it works out fine. And CAPEX, which was the Canadian National Show last year, was virtual, and I judged that show also. So yeah, we're judging virtual shows. We have to alter the rules a little bit in order to accommodate it, but it seems to be working okay. I just hope it doesn't go that way completely, because you lose the camaraderie of going to a stamp show and rubbing elbows with people.
Yeah, we had competitive exhibits, I guess, 6-7 years ago. And, we're just too small a venue. We're getting information in and things like that, but it was the same ones over and over again. So we just went to club member displays and would fill in about maybe 25 frames of this is interesting stuff, no rules to show it, and it worked out. Yeah, and it got people to show and share their material. Yeah. Mike Wilson, you had a hand. Were you reaching out, or did you have a question?
Nope, I had asked my question. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I have one question, actually, one more question. So you mentioned having, reduced size images. What about the opposite? I mean, sometimes you want to be able to show a detail of a stamp, maybe only a small part of a stamp, or maybe the whole stamp, but you want to show a detail. And instead of putting the stamp and one of these arrows, you really could print it and show so that the viewer can see better what it is about. Is that something that's verboten, or is it done?
Oh, no, that's done all the time. Yeah. That's acceptable, sure.
Other questions? Well, thank you. And Ed, we have your information. People who do have questions can go with you, because I always look at exhibiting really as one of the, even though I don't do it, and I open confession, but really one of the hearts of the hobby, you know, the research and stuff like that. And so much, so important. I just want to, you know, keep you going. I enjoy seeing them. And we thank you, people who do exhibit and share and help others to learn how to do the exhibit. So thank you once again.
Okay. I'm going to chime off because I know you're going to continue the meeting.
All right. Well,
Um,
thank you very much. We appreciate it. You're always welcome to join us. I'll keep you on our friends list, and we will, you'll get our news